Good morning, everyone. So happy to see all of you again here, and I hope you enjoyed last night and yesterday. And we have a really great program today again as well. So my name is Mieke Schuurman. I'm Eurochart's Director of Children's Rights and Capacity Building, and I'm delighted to welcome you to, with more than 450 participants here in the room, but also online. We have an amazing number of people that registered for this event, to the Building Children's Future Conference, and using children's rights to recover from the global pandemic. Together with the Children's Rights Alliance Ireland and our other project partners, we are celebrating today the results of a 2-year project on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children and how child rights impact assessments could be used to help in future emergency situations. I will be your moderator for the first part of this morning and will then hand over to my colleague, Julie Ahern from the Child Rights Alliance in Ireland. Before we get on with the program, I have a few important housekeeping and child safeguarding measures to share with you. As children are participating in our event, we should all be committed to create and maintain an environment that promotes the protection of children and their well-being at all times. Adults should refrain from having one-on-one conversations with children in private. For this reason, the private online chat function has been disabled for the online participants. Make sure when you speak to use user-friendly language, as most participants have English as their second language. When you take or post pictures with children in it, they should focus on an activity and where possible show groups, not individuals. In addition, please keep our followers updated via social network using the hashtag EuroChildConf and hashtag Building Children's Future to tag us on social media if you're sharing photos, videos, or tweeting about the event. Wait a minute. Throughout the webinar, online participants will be able to post questions through the Q&A function. And participants in the room can ask questions when indicated by the moderators. The webinar will be recorded, and any presentations used by speakers will be made available on the event webpage after the event. In case you have any concerns or suspicions about the safety of a child or actions or behavior of an adult present at the event today, you should report this to the child protection focal person for the event, which is Khalil Cambron, who is sitting there with the yellow lanyard. And for online participants, that is Lenia Kriki, our child safeguarding person. So she will be online. And her contact details will be shared in the chat. For further information, you will find the posters on child safeguarding everywhere in the room. And for those online, you can scan the QR code for our child protection policy and our code of conduct. We have a great agenda, so while there is no break during the conference this morning, there is a short comfort break of 5 minutes to change between sessions. But to keep our energy high, there will be refreshments and coffee available at the room from 10 o'clock onwards, and participants can take a drink or a break and rejoin the conversation at their comfort. So before handing over to our Eurochild's President, Marie-Louise Colera-Precker, I will briefly introduce the Building Children's Future project. The reason this project was started was that we as project partners found that because of pandemic restrictions, many children experienced increased exposure to abuse, neglect, poverty, hunger, social exclusion, and mental health difficulties. We set out together to create and implement an important policy-making tool to ensure children's rights are taken into consideration from the start of decision-making. This tool is a Child Rights Impact Assessment. This means for any decision being made, the impact of those decisions on children's rights, such as access to education, safety, housing, play, health, and so on, would all need to be considered from the get-go. In this project, we examined the impact of pandemic measures on activities and services for children and young people. This was done by documenting how decisions were made at national and local level, with Ireland as our country of focus. The research for this project was carried out with children and young people aged 14 till 18 years old from across Ireland, and they were trained as co-researchers. And this was led by our project partners, the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre at the University of Galway, Ireland's leading youth organisation. Forage, they facilitated and supported the work of the Children and Young Persons Advisory Group, who you will hear from shortly. So children from diverse backgrounds aged between 8 and 17 were participating in consultations on the impact of the pandemic on their lives. In addition, senior government and public officials were interviewed by the young people and researchers, together on how decision-making structures operated at local and national level during the pandemic. This research resulted in a fantastic report called the Public Building Children's Future, the Children's Report, which will be presented shortly to you. Next to the research with children, a review was carried out on the use of child rights impact assessments in Europe, which resulted in the development of a new CRIA tool to be used in Ireland. CRIA is short for Child Rights Impact Assessments. A CRIA training on how to use the tool has also been developed and piloted just these last days in Ireland. The latter was carried out by another project partner, the Children and Young People Services Committees, and TUSLA, Ireland's Child and Family Agency. A crucial partner has also been the Irish government's Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, and its Irish Child Rights Policy Unit, who has also been supporting the implementation of CRIAs. You will also hear more about these elements. Our role as Eurochild has been to support the project's dissemination both nationally and at European level, and this discussion culminates that effort. As a result of the project activities, child rights impact assessments are now excitingly included in Ireland's new national policy framework for children and young people, Young Ireland. Finally, I would like to thank the European Commission for funding this important project, in particular Marie-Cécile Rouillon, the Commission's coordinator on the rights of the child, who will share reflections later this morning, and she will be joining us online, and our project officer Maria Sternativo, who is also with us online today. I would now like to give the floor to Eurochild's president, and President of the Malta Foundation for the Wellbeing of Society, Her Excellency Marie-Louise Colera-Preca, for welcoming words.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Mika, for this thorough overview, of what will be happening today. So good morning to everybody, and dear friends and colleagues, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our numerous participants, both online and obviously in the room. Today's discussion, in particularly, is very relevant, as we will hear about the results of this research conducted in Ireland on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children. The research findings are highlighting that crisis-related decisions on restrictions, especially on serious concerns like a pandemic, must be evidence-based and made through consultation to assess their impact on children's rights. Moreover, special consideration must be given to children disproportionately affected by government responses, including those living in poverty, children with special educational needs, and children accessing health, mental health, and disability services, as well as Roma, refugee, and asylum-seeking children. The development of a child's rights impact assessment tool to use in situations of emergency decisions is a very important outcome of the project. And I would like to express my wish that the outcome of this important research, and in particular the impact assessment tool, will be rolled out across Europe. A similar study on the impact of the pandemic on children was conducted by the Malta Foundation for the Wellbeing of Society. However, this was targeted to evaluate the impact on children's mental health and well-being. Mika, our director, asked me to mention a bit about this project in Malta as well. I remember so clearly how children during the pandemic had expressed fears and concerns about the pandemic, including social isolation, loss of loved ones, lack of access to online education, and missing school meals. Children highlighted issues related to mental health and advocated for the need to address fear, anxiety, and stress. A particular part of the study in Malta focused on children aged 5 to 7, which highlighted various psychological concerns with differences based on socio-cultural backgrounds. Maltese children worried about family health and safety, while children from African countries also living in Malta were haunted by traumatic experiences from conflict zones and perilous journeys. Children have spoken loudly and clearly. They made us aware of the relevance of several issues that affect them. Children emphasized that they should be involved in discussions affecting them. In turn, policymakers should listen and ensure the necessary resources are available before trying to implement changes. Children wanted their education to involve team-building activities, online, homework, and interactive learning methods. Children were very aware of their mental and emotional well-being. They wanted adults to address COVID-related mental health issues and promote open discussions about mental and emotional health. Well, it is also in this context that I congratulate Children's Rights Alliance of Ireland, the Irish Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, Children and Young People Services Committees, TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency in Ireland, UNESCO, Child and Family Research Centres, and Eurochild for this important work, which I hope it can be disseminated as widely as possible to continue to build on it for the benefit of all children in crisis. So really well done to all the organizations and entities that have worked on this very important research. And well, I'm very proud that Eurochild was very much part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Louise Colero-Preca, for your warm welcoming words and sharing your experience with child rights impact assessments here in Malta. We now move to our first session and our first series of great speakers, sharing key learnings that have emerged from our efforts to create a child rights impact assessment in Ireland. And I would like to call them now on the stage. So we have Raya, Dr. Danielle Cannon, Carla Charles and Linda O'Sullivan. So if you can please join me on the stage. So, without further ado, I now would like to introduce the first speaker, Raya, who is a member of the Building Children's Future Child and Youth Advisory Group and the outgoing Eurochild Children's Council. Raya will present the Child and Youth Advisory Group's involvement in the research and reflections on child rights impact assessments. So, Raya, are you okay? Take the floor.
Hi everyone. No, it's okay. Hi everyone. My name is Raya. I'm a 17-year-old Nigerian Irish, and I live in Ireland. I've always been interested in science from a young age, and this passion led me to participate in various science competitions. And if anyone has ever been to one, it requires you to talk to your peers, to judges, to participants, and talk about what exactly your project is. And these experiences taught me the importance of communication, and it's a skill that I have found invaluable till date. So it drew me to start debating and participating in MUNs and model councils. Through these experiences, I observed a significant inequalities in human rights across the world we live in today. And this sparked a deep interest in me to apply to the role as an ECC member in the Eurochild Children's Council. For those who might not know, the ECC is a council of 11 children across Europe, brought together to promote child participation and advocate for children's rights across countries and beyond. As a Eurochild member, I've had the privilege of being involved in numerous activities, such as training politicians in the Baltic Sea and going to the European Parliament and meeting various MEPs. One of these, which had a big impact on me, was the Children and Young People's Advisory Group, or CIPAG as we call it, for the SERVS project Building Children's Futures. I was accompanied by 8 other youth members across Ireland in the CIPAG project, and this focused on using children's rights to recover from the global pandemic, COVID-19. We started the project in December 2022. Much like ECC meetings, we had a mix of in-person and online meetings. This approach allowed participants like myself to gradually ease into the new project while making friends along the way. These meetings were facilitated by Feroig, a youth organization in Ireland, and the University of Galway. From the very beginning, CIPAG and all youth members were actively involved. We engaged in various activities, including designing approaches to data collection, testing our activities to ensure that they were clear for young people, analyzing the gathered data, and helping to form the final recommendations. 5 of us, including myself, were also trained at the University of Galway to co-conduct interviews with senior decision makers, which were incorporated into the final report. We were given the space to take charge. Many of the people who were interviewed responded well and addressed the youth interviewer in their responses, but that wasn't always the case. This shows that youth participation needs to be something that everyone is involved and committed to make it as impactful as possible. Being a part of CIPAG has been an incredible opportunity to give back to my community and interact with like-minded peers. Through this project, myself and other members of CIPAG have been able to share our experiences while also learning from others in an inclusive space. If initiatives like this continue, our collective effort will make a tangible difference in communities, especially in how we address the impact of children's rights on certain levels, or policies, or even decisions as well. The result of our work is that government policymakers will have to ensure that they consider children's rights when they're making decisions about policy that directly affect us. This experience has also profoundly benefited me on a personal level. I have gained skills and knowledge that go beyond what a normal school curriculum would offer. Working on such important projects has prepared me for higher education and future opportunities. I believe from these experiences of being involved in CIPAG and the ECC is what allowed me to secure a spot in an Ivy League university. I have learned that the importance of teamwork, leadership, and effective communication would undoubtedly serve me in my academic journey. A few months ago, I got my acceptance letter to study politics, law, and economics in Yale University in Connecticut of the USA. If not for things like this I've been involved in, I genuinely did not believe I would have been given the opportunity to do so. Participation in projects like CIPAG highlights the importance of youth involvement in shaping our future, but also our present world today. They're crucial for young people because youth participation ensures that our voices are heard and considered in government decisions. We bring unique perspectives that adults might overlook, and input that can lead to more inclusive and effective solutions. It has boosted our confidence and self-esteem. We learn to believe in our abilities, and we understand that we can make a difference no matter our age. When young people just like myself see that ideas and efforts making a real impact, it inspires them to continue working towards positive change. It shows that our contributions matter and encourages us to stay involved in civic and community activities. My journey with Eurochild and CIPAG has been nothing short of transformative. It has allowed me to grow as an individual and make a positive impact in my community. It has allowed me to prepare for the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. I'm grateful for this experience, and I'm very excited about the future contributions I can make. Thank you all for your distinguished attention.
Thank you, Raya, for your enthusiastic and inspiring presentation on the work of the Child and Youth Advisory Group and also on your personal experiences and what it has done for your own development. Thank you. That was really, really great to listen to. We're now going to listen to our next speaker. That's Dr. Danielle Cannon, who is Assistant Professor in Applied Social Science in the School of Political Science and Sociology at the University of Galway in Ireland. She is also Senior Researcher with the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre and has been one of the lead researchers for the Children's Report. The floor is yours, Danielle.
Okay, good morning everyone. Good morning everyone here and everyone online. Delighted to be here, and I'm presenting today on behalf of Natasha Daniels, my colleague in University of Galway, and I. So what I'm going to speak to today is about, it really was the outcome of work package 2 of this overall European Commission funded project, which accumulated in the, we'll see your slides in a moment, but accumulated in a final report which is available. So the detail behind what I speak about today is available from the report online and on our own website and Eurochild's website. So the purpose of this, research that I'll speak about today was using Ireland as a case study. We wanted to understand how COVID-19 impacted on children and young people's lives, and then how government decision-making structures operated at this time. Now, as Mika has kind of referred to, we did this by 2 means. First, we conducted consultations with children and young people across Ireland aged between 8 to 17 from socially disadvantaged groups. So we were particularly interested in the impact on socially disadvantaged groups, such as children and young people experiencing poverty, educational disadvantage, children with disabilities, migrant children, and so on. And so we asked them about the impact of COVID-19 restrictions on their lives, but also we asked them their views on communication and decision-making regarding public health measures. We also spoke to 13 public officials at very senior levels within government. They were core to the government's and to our national public health emergency team's response to COVID-19. So to understand how decision-making operated at that time, we asked them about the processes during COVID-19, the consideration they gave to children's rights, but also their engagement with the child participation structures at that time. And as Raya has so eloquently spoke about this morning, we did all of this in collaboration with the Children and Young People's Advisory Group, who advised us on the research, but also co-conducted these interviews with us. Okay, so just briefly, because in the short time I have to talk to you about some of the findings, the research really did add to that growing body of evidence that public, health restrictions had a significant impact, as we all know, on children and young people's lives. And some of that body of evidence that we now have has even already been talked about at the conference. Her Excellency mentioned it this morning. The research in Malta, we had Serpa mentioned from the Director of the Fundamental Rights Agency, their research as well about the significant impact on children's lives. So very much consistent with this body of research, we found that it mostly impacted children's right to education, the right to play, recreation and leisure, the right to health and access to healthcare, and their right to a family. But children and young people were also consistently of the view that they did not have a say regarding the public health restrictions, and they very much believed that they should have had an input. So they spoke to us about how they would have liked to have had an input, how they could have had an input by being asked in person, being asked in line. They spoke about schools, youth clubs, sports clubs, social media, and different ways that they could have been and wish they could have been accessed, also via public broadcasting. And a common theme that often came up among the children was, if they were to share their views, they could have had a vote, that there may be through social media, online surveys and so on, that they could have had an input through a vote in that context. Okay, so in terms of what the senior public officials spoke to us about, so child rights impact assessments weren't conducted. They did speak to us about certainly having awareness and trying to take into consideration children's rights, but decision making was a very challenging exercise in balancing rights and risks. And as the pandemic evolved and persisted, it became increasingly challenging for them. You know, they spoke about some of the challenges being the lack of data to understand the impact at the time, and certainly in the very early stages of the pandemic, the fact that there was no clear reopening strategy, the political pressure also to curtail the spread of the virus. But a couple of things, as I have here on the slide, did help them to keep a focus on children's rights. So this was very much aided by social impact reports conducted by the government, and media monitoring and an awareness through the media of some of the impacts. Also, when parents and advocacy groups and children themselves began to mobilise and really advocate for their rights. It was also aided by the fact that there were some, and this wasn't by design as such, it was just happened to be some children's champions in senior decision making roles or senior advisory roles, and they tried to keep the children's rights issues kind of on the table. The senior public officials also spoke to us about, you know, while they had it was essential to curtail certain rights, they put an emphasis on alternative measures that could be put in place to really mitigate the impact of the public health measures on children's rights. And these really proved to be very important. So things like, you know, continuing to work to core policy objectives that they were already in place pre-pandemic, you know, despite the changed working environment, trying to keep services as open as possible or to designate certain services as essential. Of course, as we all know, transitioning to new forms of service delivery, particularly online service delivery, trying to maintain that contact and outreach with families, even if it was by online means. And essentially, they spoke about the importance of working with the community and the voluntary sector that really helped to ensure a continuity of support, a continuity of services on the ground at that very local level, and particularly for children and families living in very vulnerable situations. So one of a final finding I mentioned today was that, you know, and despite the profound impact on children, with some exceptions, there were some consultations conducted, but that core kind of government evidence-based strategy informing public health decisions was not informed by children's views. There were weekly quantitative and qualitative trackers of public opinion and to try and understand the impact of the measures on public, but children weren't part or weren't informing those qualitative and quantitative trackers. Okay, so lastly, just to speak to you about just to try and draw together in the last minute, I have the learning for child rights impact assessments in terms of some of the learning from the research. So certainly the research really reiterated the importance of child rights impact assessments, again reiterated the importance of those assessments, that they must be underpinned by evidence and we must have available data. And of course that data must be informed and be inclusive of the views of children and young people also. And as I said in the report, it's detailed in the report, the young people had some interesting views about, again, how they could be accessed and share their views. The research also, spoke to the need also to have that the data informing that evidence-based approach needs to be desegregated, because we found that obviously the measures had very different impacts and different levels of impact across different social groups. So we really needed to, the data needs to be desegregated to understand those differences. We also, it spoke to the need that professionals with an expertise in children and young people need to be strategically positioned within decision-making structures, informing key decisions, or in this case, informing the response to the COVID-19 crisis. And lastly, it also, as I've kind of referred to in the findings, it also reiterated the importance of that when the curtailment of children's rights is necessary, those measures that can be taken to mitigate the impact on children's rights really must be central and a core consideration in times of crisis. Okay, so that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Danielle Cannon, for sharing the outcomes of the research on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children, and how these learnings and recommendations can be used in carrying out child rights impact assessments. I would also recommend everyone to read the report, which you can find on our events page. I now would like to continue and give the floor to Carla Charles, who is the EU Programs and Know Your Rights Project Manager at the Children's Rights Alliance in Ireland, which she joined in 2022. Carla has worked in the children's rights and human rights sector for over 15 years and worked amongst others with Ombudsman for Children's Office and the EU Fundamental Rights Agency. She will share best practices of responses to the pandemic using child rights impact assessments for children and young people. So, Carla, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everybody, and good morning to those online as well. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with you some further aspects of the project that we have been working on. So I'm here speaking about best practices of responses to the pandemic and using child rights impact assessments for children and young people. Sorry, I'm just waiting for the, there we go. Okay. So, for Ireland's last reporting process, the UN Committee concluding observations actually recommended that Ireland develop child rights impact assessments. And for those of you that don't know, child rights impact assessments is a framework that helps decision makers understand how children's rights, needs, and best interests, as laid out in the UNCRC and other international human rights treaties, may be affected by a proposal, a law, a policy, or a decision. As we all know, and has been alluded to already this morning, the pandemic impacted every aspect of society. The impact of COVID on children's poverty, survival, health, learning, and safety were all really far-reaching, but the effects were not equally distributed. The pandemic had impacts on civil and political rights because in order to overcome the health crisis aspect, severe restrictions on the freedom of movement of people, as we all know, and many other rights were imposed. This is a clear example of the interplay between restrictions to protect rights on one hand and upholding human rights on the other hand, including children's rights, as Danielle mentioned earlier. During the pandemic, upholding human rights and children's rights was not really considered a priority because decisions had to be made relatively quickly and reactively. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the time, for example, recommended that restrictions should therefore only be imposed when necessary, be proportionate, and kept to an absolute minimum. But the lack of transparency in some COVID-19 decision-making processes and the potential of decisions to exacerbate certain inequalities, especially those experienced by vulnerable children and other vulnerable groups, has therefore been a focus of the human rights community. Independent pandemic inquiries are helping to shed light on the decision-making processes for this period, but are children's rights adequately being considered as part of these inquiries worldwide? I think that would be a very interesting question to consider and to further examine. So, child well-being really came to the fore during the COVID-19 pandemic, when children's well-being, their education, and emotional development were significantly impacted, and inequalities really became more pronounced. Child well-being has therefore received more attention across many countries, particularly in terms of planning the post-pandemic recovery strategies. So in times of emergencies, we really need to therefore have simple systems in place to ensure that certain rights are not overlooked. This is where we consider crisis lawmaking and the role of CRIAs and how they should play and what role they should play in ensuring that children's rights figure more prominently within every one-day decision-making, as well as emergency lawmaking and policy and service development. So crisis lawmaking is really when emergency laws and policies are adopted in order to respond to a crisis or an emergency situation. And as the pandemic unfolded, the impact of laws adopted without assessing their impact on individuals really became clear. Many argued that crisis lawmaking was a necessary intervention, but that states should really gather and analyze data in order to understand the extent to which people, especially the marginalized, were being disadvantaged. This was not always done. In times of crisis, decisions are usually made to protect fundamental rights, such as the right to life and health. But human rights are rarely regarded as a central concern for governments during a crisis. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, for example, came out early in the pandemic to warn of the specific, longer-term effects of emergency legislation passed without considering the impact it could have on children's rights. How the decisions were made and how human rights, including children's rights, should and could have been incorporated are important learnings for the world over to ensure that human rights, and within our own context here, children's rights, are better protected in future crisis lawmaking. So I just wanted to touch on some of the best practice examples that were sort of uncovered as part of this research. And one of the things that's already been mentioned through the course of this morning is the roles played by NGOs and Ombudsman for Children's Office, the local communities, the children's commissioners were there for paramount. For example, in Belgium, the Flemish Children's Commissioner was invited to sit at the high-level decision-making meetings. And this was important, and certainly an easy step for other countries to replicate. In Wales, the Children's Commissioner carried out exemplary work on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on children and young people and provides very good insight into some of the marginalized groups and their experiences during this time. In Sweden, the Ombudsman stressed to the government to consider the impact of decision-making during the COVID pandemic, and it didn't so in line with its legislation. The use of CREA in Scotland was exemplary, and the Scottish Government published many CREAs in regard to the COVID-19 pandemic emergency measures. This drew attention to children and young people's human rights across government and society, and it meant that decision-making was more proportionate in terms of its impact on children, and particular, more vulnerable children. For example, a CREA was published in January 22, which examined the impact of COVID-19 restrictions on children and young people, which amongst other things considered the right of younger children under the age of 12 to play and socialize freely with their peers. And it was decided that it was essential that this group should be free to meet up with their friends. The CREA was instrumental in this decision-making process, and I'm sure Bruce Adamson will add to this later on this morning. So some of the other interesting things, I suppose, that some of us will know about, but that I think it's important to highlight, is that things that were done were things like mental health supports went online in Belgium and Ireland, which was not ideal, but was nonetheless a bridge for those very much in need to create supports during a very stressful time. School meals, many countries established or kept these going. For example, in Wales, they kept these going during the holiday period, and it even became a significant political issue in England. Often devices were sponsored and distributed by governments and school institutions. Some schools stayed open for some of the more vulnerable families, and there were examples of a central information hub to guide and support teachers and promote good practice and support. National broadcasting companies put together educational programming, and consultations with children during the COVID-19 occurred in many countries, including Scotland. So when we look at the role of CREA, promoting and safeguarding their rights, what is needed? And when we look at this, it's looking at the role that CREA can play in helping to promote and safeguard children's rights. And really the fundamental thing is to keep it simple, not to make it an arduous process. The training and support is crucial, and this project, as Mika mentioned, has developed a toolkit and a training video to help in this regard, and will be available for all of you to view online. This was developed as part of the project to help those embarking or learning about this process and learning about CREA. The CREA framework really has to be easy to use. The data needs to be easily and accessible. The data needs to be accessible, and where it isn't, states and people filling out CREA frameworks should ensure that this is mentioned so that it provides an incentive for countries to further enhance their data collection and disaggregation. In order for people to access other examples of CREA and to learn from them, it's important that they should be published, and that participation with children and young people be accessible, and that the findings of previous and similar participation should also be accessible. An online hub, for example, of child-related material from data to participation findings, as well as examples of CREA and some key guidelines and training, and a point of contact for supportive questions would be very useful. So why should we use CREA? Well, as I've mentioned, both the UNCRC and the UNICEF state that CREA improve policy making for children and young people. It helps mainstream international children's rights principles and standards into national and local planning, service design, and delivery. It helps identify the impacts, both positive and negative, early on in a planning process. And it helps identify gaps in data and evidence and showcase good data. It's a rights-based approach to decision-making and evidence-based policy development. It is independent, transparent, accountable decision-making. It creates better understanding, questioning, justification to wider society of changes in terms of children and young people. It involves children and young people and the voice of children and young people, and it creates champions for children's rights. So this is really why developing child right impact assessments would have helped us greatly during times of crisis such as the COVID-19 pandemic, and why really we should all be moving forward with this as an impact assessment and taking leads from other countries who have already done so. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Carla Charles, for your insightful overview of best practices on the use of CREAs during the pandemic across Europe, but also what is needed to carry out CREAs and why do we need child rights impact assessments. Thank you very much for that, and thank you for your interesting words and for pointing out also to our events page. So if you would like to have more information, please go to the events page to find out more. We will now turn to our last speaker in this round, which is Linda O'Sullivan. She works at the Child Rights Policy Unit, Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth of the Government of Ireland. She is responsible for the implementation of the Enabling Environment Actions of Young Ireland, which is the National Policy Framework for Children and Young People 2023 until 2028, including the development and implementation of child rights impact assessments. She is a member of the Council of Europe Committee on the Rights of the Child and on the EU Network of Children's Rights. Linda will reflect on a pathway to child rights impact assessments in Ireland. So Linda, the floor is yours. Would you need
yeah, I think it's... Okay. Okay, I must remember to speak into the microphone. So I will set the context, the policy context in Ireland for child rights and child rights impact assessments. So the National Policy Framework for Children and Young People, Young Ireland, was launched about 9 months ago now, and it sets a vision that was based on the vision on the previous policy of an Ireland which fully respects and realises the rights of children and young people. So it is a child rights-based policy framework based on the ages from birth up to 24, so also incorporates young people and youth check. Ireland ratified the UNCRC in 1992. And the previous policy framework set 5 national outcomes for children and young people, which continues into this framework, and also includes supports for young people up to age 24 and in the transition to young adulthood. So Young Ireland was developed based on extensive consultations with civil society and with children and young people. And it was based on the current issues impacting children and young people and the current policy landscape. Over 1,300 children from age 4 up to 17 and young people were consulted through schools in the general population, and additional consultations were then carried out with particular populations of children and young people who had reported particular issues. So additional consultations were carried out with young people at risk of homelessness, or experiencing homelessness, with young carers, with young people from minority backgrounds. So it was also, the development of the framework was also based on data such as the indicator set, census and other data sources, and also was informed by the EU Child Guarantee and the UN concluding observations. We had just finished a review. Okay, so the 5 national outcomes are that children and young people are active and healthy, achieving in learning and development, safe and protected from harm, economic security and opportunity, connected, respected and contributing to their worlds. 3 spotlights were identified of particular concern: child and youth poverty, mental health and well-being, and disability services. And the enabling environment. So it was determined that the environment in which the policy landscape would operate would require the following supports to ensure that child rights were actually being actualised through the policy framework. So a legislative review. Ireland is a dualist state, so this legislative review has commenced to examine where there may be gaps in the legislation in meeting the UNCRC. Capacity building, which involves training of civil and public servants in child rights and their obligations under the UNCRC, child budgeting, parenting support, workforce development, particularly around the areas that have been identified, healthcare and mental health care, awareness raising of child rights, youth services, interagency coordination, participation of children and young people in decision making, which I will come back to in a moment, data and research development, and the action that we're here to talk about today, which is the Child Rights Impact Assessment. So, Child and Youth Impact Assessments is named in Young Ireland as a key enabling action, and the broad action is to collaborate with partners on the development of the prototype Child Rights Impact Assessment and to roll out across government over the lifetime of the policy framework. So as set out, I won't go into detail on this because the other speakers have really set out what a child rights impact assessment is. In the case of the instrument that we are developing for use in government, it will also incorporate youth check. But the idea is that it is designed to help key decision makers identify, research, analyse and record the predicted impact of a proposed decision on children's rights. And that would apply to draft legislation, policy, programme development, all decisions across government making, across all government departments. And it is a measure of implementation of the UNCRC. So why is the Irish government committed to this? The UNCRC requires governments to undertake all appropriate legislative, administrative and other measures for the implementation of the rights. It is an instrument for that purpose. It helps predict both positive and negative impacts of policy decisions, and where it identifies potential negative impacts, mitigating or protective factors can be put in place, particularly as outlined by Carla in emergency decision-making contexts. So, our pathway to child and youth impact assessment. So setting out our ambition first is to have real impact on the consideration of child rights in government decision-making processes, to pilot with a wide range of policymakers, both those very close to child matters and those who might see themselves as more distant from child matters, to provide adequate supports for its rollout in terms of training, guidelines, support, etc., to integrate with other impact assessments such as equality impact and public sector duty, and to develop an instrument that is workable within the context of government decision-making processes. So this work will build on 2 decades of work on the participation of children and young people in decision-making in Ireland, and the success that Ireland has had in putting those permanent structures in place of youth councils across all the local authorities, national executive of the Youth Council, Corlan and Og, National Youth Assembly, which is from 16 to 24-year-olds, which is another permanent structure that reviews and inputs into policy matters such as climate action, biodiversity, artificial intelligence, rural affairs, and on the ongoing consultations with children who are impacted by government decision-making as those decision-making processes are occurring. The first step of our pathway towards child rights impact assessment was a child summit in Croke Park, our national Gaelic Games headquarters in Dublin last November, where Professor Jaffe from the UNCRC attended, where we had high-level ministerial and attendance, as well as our Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, and very senior policymakers, other stakeholders and young people, all in a room together, examining the issues that were raised by the UNCRC in their concluding observations, and discussing those in breakout rooms as to how all players can come together to work together to best achieve the actions set out under the framework. So that's just another photograph from the day with our minister and some of the young people that were involved in programming and running the event with us. So it also builds on, oops, sorry, I knew this would happen, apologies. And it also builds on the work that has been completed critically as part of this engagement with Eurochild, Children's Rights Alliance, University of Galway, and Foróige in this, the developing of a draft child rights impact assessment. And that draft impact assessment we brought to senior policymakers in April in the department to get their feedback on that first draft, so that we can at all stages get that buy-in from senior policymakers to ensure that we develop that we continue to develop and pilot this instrument until it is at a point where we have full buy-in from policymakers, and where it becomes a meaningful, usable instrument that will have a real impact on child rights. So our next steps, and I am wrapping up, I promise. Oops. Continued engagement and learning from international models, and we have been speaking to other governments and learning from other governments. Scotland has been hugely supportive, and we're learning enormously from what they have been doing. We're moving forward with our next stages of consultation with a wider range of policymakers, examining when and how it should be used, what the barriers are, what capacity building is required. We will be piloting the instrument and developing out our training in collaboration with partners. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda, for sharing the perspective from the Irish government on implementing CRIAs and for taking this forward within Ireland's national policy framework for children and young people. We now have time for 1 or 2 questions, so we're doing really well. So I would like to open the floor for any questions from the room. And I will, thank you, Julie. I also have a few questions already online, which I now have on my phone. So I could start with that. Or is there anyone here? Because I would like to give priority first. Yeah, Ernest? I got a few.
Thanks very much for that. My name's Ernest from Children in Northern Ireland, and great to hear about all the work that's going on with CRIAs in the Republic. Do the Irish government have any plans to make it a statutory duty on departments to conduct these assessments? And also, I think the community and voluntary sector are uniquely positioned to provide evidence on the impact, and just wondering what kind of work you're doing with NGOs to kind of strengthen that process.
Is this on? Yeah. Would you mind repeating the first part of your question? I missed the start of your question.
Sure, just whether there are any plans to make it a statutory duty.
So in terms of statutory duty, that will emerge from the piloting process, and we will examine how feasible that is. In our first stage of development, we will look at the existing processes, including Memo to Gov, and where it would fit within that process. It will also fit in with the public sector duty and align with that. So we will examine where that comes out over the piloting process over the next year or so. In terms of engagement with the NGO sector, this is part of that engagement. The first draft of this instrument has been developed by the Children's Rights Alliance, and we will continue to engage with the NGO and civil society sector as we pilot and develop this out into the next stage. We're very aware that the NGO sector and civil society are a crucial part of the infrastructure for implementation and for monitoring and evaluation and accountability. So we are very aware of that and recognise the importance of a really strong civil society and NGO sector in holding us to account on this work.
Thank you, Linda. I hope that answered your question, Ernest. I also would like to pose one question that came online. There were a few. This is a question from Raluca, who is our member who joined us online, and she asks, she would like to know if those working on the presented studies have noticed any early signs of impact on child participation following their studies. Have they noticed any interest and measures taken by local and national governments? Any measures to apply? Any recommendations in the current emergency crisis around the world? It's quite a lot, but is there anyone? Is there anyone who would like to answer part of the question? Yeah.
Maybe I'll just take the first part, just in terms of impact on participation. I mean, those of us familiar with Ireland know Ireland really is a leader in terms of children's participation. And, you know, and has a dedicated unit, Hub na Nóg, that supports professionals to engage with children and young people. So there is a lot of work already happening in this area. I think this study just, our work and our study just reminded us that when we have structures, or I'm not sure what the word is like that, the quantitative and qualitative tracker of public opinion and public views on impact that were happening during COVID-19, that child participation has to be also embedded within those structures. So while there's excellent, and Linda talked about the excellent youth councils around the country, we have youth parliaments, many structures, it's also about making sure they're integrated with procedures or processes in place to inform things like the COVID-19 restrictions.
Okay, thank you. I think we can take one more question from the floor. Are there any other questions from the floor? Yeah, I see. Julien?
Thank you for having this discussion. I want to know if a test of poverty has become legal, if they think that this is resolved, because in Flanders we have already the poverty tests, but it can be made by every minister, and they ask always an exception.
Sorry, no, it's quite difficult to hear. Can you please speak loudly in the microphone, because we cannot hear it very well here.
If you think that a poverty test, child poverty test, can resolve all problems.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting point, because as we know, many of the marginalized and vulnerable groups who are mostly affected detrimentally during the COVID pandemic also had other life-impacting situations such as poverty. And therefore, I think you're right that looking at other impact assessment processes is crucial in looking at child right impact assessments. And in fact, some countries don't just carry out child right impact assessments, they carry out more broad human rights impact assessments that encompass children's rights, including poverty. I mean, equality impact assessments are carried out elsewhere, and that's a very good example of where it can have far-reaching effects. You can have budgeting impact assessments, and that can be looked at in terms of children. So I really think, it's very much open for discussion and debate in terms of how we steer and direct. I think, though, initially, certainly in the case of Ireland, we're looking very much at child rights impact assessments in isolation so that we can develop a very simple process that is accessible and user-friendly, and therefore will actually be used by key policy and service development individuals. I think that over the long term, as things become more embedded, and perhaps others will be able to add to this, I think that you could look at having a wider impact assessment process that encompasses more, different things, and you have aspects under it where it might be poverty or gender or equality, and it's all encompassing so that we really have a more equal and egalitarian society for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. To this one. I would like to close this session now with reflections on the role of the child rights impact assessments that the EU can play. I would like to thank the speakers already that are on stage. So, but you please, can you remain seated? So Linda O'Sullivan, Carla Charles, Dr. Danielle Cannon and Raya for their amazing speeches. But I now would like to ask Marie-Cécile Royon to join us online to share her reflections. She is the European Coordinator on the Rights of the Child. Marie-Cécile Royon is responsible for the implementation on the EU strategy on the rights of the child and for mainstreaming children's rights across EU policies. Welcome, Marie-Cécile. I hope you can hear us well.
Yes. Yeah, perfectly well. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mickey, and warm thanks to Eurochild for this conference. I'm really sad to be in rainy Brussels today, but also very happy to be able to join you online. Thank you. Warm thanks also to all children, Raya, Excellency Marie-Louise Corella-Preca, and you, Mickey, and to the area department for children, equality and youth. And we're really pleased to have funded this project with European Union money under the program Citizens, Equality, Rights and Value. In a nutshell, this project was based in Ireland, and we're really thankful for that, but it's also very important for the whole European Union. Because that's also a tool that could be extremely useful and inspiring, and also to make societies more resilient for children. It's very important to have strong evidence showing how children were affected in the specific situation of the COVID pandemic. And it's even more important to also see how that could be useful when children are facing the impact of war, economic crisis, now and the future climate change, and how basically we could make sure that when there is a policy that is developed, it takes fully into consideration children's rights for education, health, mental health. I was very interested to see that was highlighted again. That's also what children are telling us. There were things that were put in place at the EU level with the EU strategy on the right of the child, with the European Child Guarantee. The question of poverty was mentioned before, and that's a very important flagship initiative. I would also say on child protection, that's also why we issued recommendation to member states to make sure that there is also a check, there are data that member states are looking at the child protection and the impact on children. And also in the policy that the EU is following on mental health, where indeed there is a strong place for children. I would also say that what we are working on, I mean, you mentioned that I'm a coordinator for the right of the child, is basically to make sure that when colleagues and services are working on policies, we check what is going on with children's rights, if there is an impact. For this, we also have a tool in-house that's called Better Regulation Toolbox, so Impact Assessment Toolbox, and certainly we could also make that stronger. That was also mentioned that it's extremely important to involve children directly. You see behind me, that's the poster of the new visual identity of the EU Children's Participation Platform that was developed with children, and even more importantly, all what we will put on the agenda of this platform has been also developed with children. And they are also telling what is important to them. Mental health, poverty, climate change, education, different topics. And to conclude, it's very important to have this structured way of looking at the impact of policies on children's rights. It's also very important that there are such pilots that are developed, also supported by EU funds, but also promoted and worked on by member states, authorities. We're grateful for that. And I will also say, and that was also said before, The child rights organization having a very important role to play. There was reference to Ombudsperson for Children, but I would also say, because you are the closest also to children, looking at the real life impact of crisis, of policies on children, and it's extremely important to all work together in that direction. So our role is to create a space for children, is to create space to listen to children, but it's also to create a space in policy making for listening to their views and listening to, I would say, their needs. So for this, I think that's a very inspiring project. So many thanks for that. I'm happy if you have any question. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie-Cécile. Thank you for your inspiring words and your endless support for the implementation of children's rights at the EU. And yeah, I'm sorry you can't be with us in the sunny Malta.
Next time, I promise.
Thank you.
When it's not in Malta.
And thank you also for sharing about the EU children's participation platform. I would like to have a warm applause for our other speakers this morning. We now have a 5-minute break. So it's just to reorganize the panel discussion here, and also for you to grab a refreshment or a coffee to keep going and to keep your energy levels up. For those that are joining us online, hope you can grab a coffee or refreshment at home or your office or wherever you are. And then we will restart the next panel discussion with Julie in 5 minutes. And I also would like to thank all the online participants for their great interactions online. We are not able to see that here, but I did note, I was informed by my colleague here, Kieran, that there is a lot of discussions going on there. So we will try to capture all of that and share that on our events page. So thank you, 5 minutes break, and continue. The laptop is here. I was actually leaving it open in case.
I will go forward. And then we're all in order. Likely I might fall off the stage. I'm trying to figure out how likely I am to fall off the stage if I stand. Yeah. Yeah, if they, yeah, if they, yeah, which is great. Because we're rock stars. Yeah, and we have to do it well. Okay. You don't have to do it. I'm not sure today. What news is for if it's safer. So, you know, when I came down without it, I got told off not. Right. And I thought, and then everybody was totally wrong. We're going to start back in 1 minute if you want to grab a coffee and take your seats. 1 minute. Can I sit at the end? I'm going to go here, so if you want to swap with Ronnie, you can. No, you want it to be the end. No, but you can be at the end. But you can swap if you'd like. You want me to swap? Yeah. I didn't use it last, so I have a glass there. That's perfect, thank you. I'm trying to figure if I can stand without. That's just mine. Yeah, it's okay. Are you okay? Yeah. Anything? No, I'm just waiting for her. One on the chair. Yeah. If you could all take your seats, we're going to start back. I don't know, I can keep that at my place. I was very comfortable being at the end. It's been very nice to your colleague. It's too nice. Yes. Oh, no, this is nice. I think that's of the messy people. I'm really worried. Here on? We're starting.
Do we all have enough glasses?
Yes.
Good luck.
My microphone. Yeah. Okay, we're going to start back. For those of you online, welcome back. And for those in the room, I would just encourage you to bring your coffee and sit down, if you wouldn't mind. We're going to start back with an expert panel. And I'm delighted to be joined today by a number of experts. And we're going to look at, I suppose, what can happen now, having heard about the project this morning, on a European level, and what lessons can we learn. So I'm delighted to be joined by, to my right, Veronique, who is an independent human rights consultant, from Coleman Niclua from the Children and Young People Services Committee in Ireland in the TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency, Professor Bruce Adamson, who is from the University of Galway and a former of Glasgow, wrong country, and a former Commissioner for Children and Young People in Scotland, and then finally by Kath Larkson from the University of Central Lancashire. So you're all very welcome, and thank you for joining me today. So I'm going to start maybe with you, Colma, because you are part of the project team, and we would have heard this morning a lot about conducting child rights impact assessments on a national level, but you've just come out of training people on a local level around child rights impact assessments. And I'd be really interested in getting your views, first of all, on the training, but also on what can be done to support people on that local level to use child rights impact assessments.
Great, thanks Julie. And it's great to see so many people here interested in children's rights impact assessments. So just as Julie said, Choose the Child and Family Agencies where I work, and I lead out on an interagency initiative around Children and Young People Services Committees. So that's about bringing all of agencies together. So I suppose the first thing I would say in terms of we rolled out training to about 150 people with the Children's Rights Alliance in June. And there was massive interest, Julie, in actually engaging in the training. So I'd say that from the outset in terms of people and thinking about embarking on supporting communities, that there's a massive interest out there in learning about children's rights. And I think we really, really would do well as, I suppose, organisations who have maybe children and young people above the front door to consider that we're working and children are living in systems with services that don't necessarily focus on children initially. So we really need to think about that in terms of the communities and influencing and working with all sectors that are providing services to families and children and young people, and not just, I suppose, within our own knowledge base. There is an appetite and a hunger for children's rights training and for knowledge around children's rights in the first instance, and I think that's crucial. We are here to talk about CREAs, but I do think we need to support the development of a language and understanding around children's rights and responsibilities. One of the very interesting things that came up by training participants that we met over the last month in June was, that kind of reflection on, I always thought I was kind of, child-centred, but actually this is really, really good in terms of really consolidating and giving me a platform or a framework around how to advocate for children. So it might seem really obvious to those who are already working in the child and youth sector, but we are also interacting with local authorities, with justice systems, with health systems who might not necessarily think children first. So I think that's really important in terms of how we start. Creating that culture or that language of children's rights and thinking about how are we educating children and young people themselves or the families that we interact with around their own rights. And obviously with rights come responsibilities. And then on to, I suppose, that piece around maybe some sort of a public awareness campaign to kind of generalise or make it more known what children's rights are, and so that, it has to come from top down and bottom up at the same time so that we're all singing or creating the same message. And then to embark on a process of CREA training, which is really, really valuable. Participants in our training courses really, really valued sort of that framework, that kind of method that they could go through and steps in terms of how to actually put children into the centre of the conversation. And that it's not just about policy and legislation. Obviously, that's really, really important because it shapes how we deliver our services, but it's also about considering, I need to change the opening hours of my service. I need to merge my two services because we have budget cuts. How is that change in my local service going to impact on children? So it's really, really helpful from that very practical perspective. So thinking about it from a service design perspective and not just policy and legislation. So I do think CREAs have a really, really good utility in terms of service design or service change, and to think about that in terms of when we're rolling it out with local community providers of services. But ultimately, participation practice is the foundation. And so we really have to have that as kind of routine practice in everybody's service, regardless of whether you're a child service or a health service or a local authority. That's really important, that participation practice piece. In Ireland, we have a national policy or statement of intent, and that's really, really important in terms of backing it up. That needs to be backed with resources, though. So one of the pieces that we've learned from our training, and I know that it is available in places like Scotland, so we're referring to you a lot today, our Scottish counterparts, just that expertise. So when something is new coming in, we have to support the implementation. And we really do need to develop that kind of expertise, resource that people can call on to get advice. But I think it's really, really important that children's rights impact assessments aren't a kind of a paint on afterwards. We don't bring the expert in to do the CREA and then they leave. We need to use that expertise to build our own capability in our own services, because the CREA ultimately is done by your own service. And also I think we really need to frame it in a positive way. So a CREA isn't a stick. It isn't something to beat a service about in terms of its inefficiencies or deficiencies. It's a strength building tool to really identify what evidence did we use, did we consult children and young people. So that's really important in terms of how we frame building capability around CREA. I do think publishing, sharing, supporting the curation of publication of CREA so that there's transparency, but also a confidence in our services locally that we do make good decisions. We have included children and young people in the decisions is really, really important. And I suppose I just kind of close with that piece, and I know Linda talked about it earlier, but public sector duty. A CREA is a really, really, really helpful tool in terms of our services realising our public sector duty and integrating that into our practice. And just finally, resourcing again, evaluation. Let's try build evaluation in from the start so that we can really measure what impact or change we are creating by developing, I suppose, an ethos and a culture of CREAs across our service system.
That's great. Thanks so much for that, Colma. I might ask you to pass the mic down to Kat there at the end, because I think, Colma, you raised some very interesting points around child participation. And Kath, I know you've worked with the Council of Europe and their participation tool. I wonder, could you tell us a bit about that? And I know you might not, but you might have someone else who can.
Yeah.
And then maybe about how it can be used around CREAs as well.
So it's really interesting that what we've been hearing about is child rights impact assessment. So that means you're trying to work out what difference it's going to make if you change the law or change the way you're doing something, and trying to work out what that will do for children and for their rights. Now, to my mind, and what you just said was, one thing that's really important is to ask children what they think. And I was involved in a project which is about trying to hear more from children and trying to strengthen the ways that different countries listen to children and build the different ways that children's voices can be heard. And that project was called CP for Europe. And in that project, I worked with a group of children, and we tried to explain what the tool was that we were using. Right? The tool was called the Child Participation Assessment Tool. And we thought assessment is a bit like what happens at school. So has anyone here ever had an assessment at school? Maybe you've had a report card. Could you put your hand up in the air if you've ever had a report card? And did it have a grade on it? Okay, so on the Child Participation Assessment Tool, you get a grade of anywhere from 0 to 1, 2, or 3. Okay. So if you think about your country, would you, and how well they're doing child participation, would you give a 0, a 1, a 2, or a 3? Would you put your hands in the air? You can do this online by taking part in the chat, putting your numbers. I see some 1s and some, a lot of 1s. 1 or 2 2s. Oh, I see a 3. Okay. So it's really interesting that in one of the countries where I just saw a 3, back in 2014, they used this thing called a Child Participation Assessment Tool to try to make a plan for what should change. And there's an animation that the group of children that I worked with created to try to explain how those plans are made. So we're going to play that now, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about how it links back up to child rights impact assessments afterwards. Can we have the animation? We're all staring at the screen, waiting for it to start.
The Child Participation Assessment Tool. This is a way of finding out how well a country is supporting children's participation.
The right for children to be listened to and taken seriously.
It's like a report card. And how does it work?
Countries look at what they're doing, they ask for feedback, then they give themselves a grade of 0 to 3 for how well they think they're doing 10 things.
Let's take a look at these 10 things.
1. Rules that say all children must be listened to and taken seriously.
The rules should make sure that all children are included without discrimination. They should be heard on issues that affect them.
2. A plan for how the country will make sure children are listened to.
The plan explains how children's ideas will be used to help make a difference on issues that children think are important.
3, someone who looks out for children's rights.
This person is separate from the government. This is called a children's ombudsperson or a children's commissioner.
4, take part safely in legal discussions.
Things like decisions about family life, care, crime, or coming to live in a new country. Children have information about what decisions will be made and how they will be kept safe.
5, children can complain about anything that is wrong.
Children have ways of telling people about things that they're not happy about.
6, training about children's participation.
Teachers, social workers, police, judges, doctors, and all people working with children are taught about children's participation.
7, information about rights to have their ideas taken seriously.
Children are given information about how children's ideas should be included in decisions.
8, groups where children can share ideas and try to make a difference.
These can be school councils, child parliaments, or participation groups.
9, ways that children can have their say about local services.
This can be about things like schools, hospitals, transport, community centres, and police.
10, children's ideas are used to help understand how well their country is doing.
This can be children telling people in your country if your rights are being respected.
So I want to say thank you to the group of young people from 5 countries who made that. You know. And now you've seen what those 10 things are. Think about those 10 things and give them a score. And give your country a score. You know. Do you still think that you're doing a 3? Have you got all of those? And are you doing them well? Because it's not just about whether they're happening, it's about whether they involve a real diversity of children from different situations, different backgrounds. So this is what countries are asked to do. You know. And in order to do that, they have to get groups of people together. They get networks of adults together, but they also absolutely have to listen to children, and they have to create the ways in which it's easier to hear from children. Did you see that one with the box and where it says the groups of children where they must create ways that children get together to share their ideas? And this is how it links back up to the child rights impact assessment. Because in order to find out in any particular situation whether a change in the law or a change in practice is going to have an impact on children, well, you have to ask children. And you can't do that quickly in emergencies unless you've already done the preparation work to start trying to create ways in which it's easier to hear from children. So, in my view, as happened in Ireland, first of all, you do the CPAT process to build the ways you listen to children and build those networks of professionals who are talking to each other as well. Then you write your plan for how you're going to make child participation stronger, might be called a national strategy. And then you start doing your child rights impact assessments. You don't have to do the CPAT if you're really good already, you know. But if you think your country's only got a 1 or maybe a 0, it's a good thing to push them to do.
That's really interesting, Kath, and I think it lends itself into the discussion that was had earlier on the importance of hearing from children and young people, but it's also a reminder, I think, of all the tools that are out there and all the best practice that we can draw on actually in our individual countries, which brings me nicely to yourself, Bruce, and we've heard a lot about Scotland today and people talking about the Scottish experience. I know you would have been central to pushing the use of child rights impact assessments. And I suppose I'm interested to hear from you about what role children's commissioners and children's ombudspeople could play across Europe when it comes to CRIAs.
Brilliant, thanks. And firstly, thanks to Eurochild and all of you for inviting me along. The last couple of days has been really amazing, and I think the role that civil society plays and the role that Eurochild plays in supporting civil society and the engagement at a high level is hugely important to the work of children's commissioners. Being a children's commissioner is the best job in the world. We get to work directly with children and young people, and then we get to yell at politicians and challenge those in power to do better. The concept of children's commissioners goes right back to the earliest days of the UN, back when we created the UN Charter. The Economic and Social Council of the UN said that as well as states making commitments to people, you needed national level bodies who could hold them to account to those promises that they made to children and others. And so there's been a growing number, particularly since the Convention on the Rights of the Child came into effect. There's been a growing number of children's commissioners, and so created by law with power to hold those in power to account, with protected funding, but with an obligation to work directly with children and young people and civil society. So it's absolutely the best job in the world, and we work directly with children. When I became Children's Commissioner, I travelled around Scotland and I asked children what they wanted from me, and they said, we want someone who comes to our communities, finds out the issues that are really important to us, but also someone who holds people in power to account. In Shetland, in the far north of Scotland, they said I should be savage in holding the government to account, the Vikings up there. So I really like that, and that was very much part of the approach that we took. And so while it's great that people have been so positive about Scotland, a big part of my role was pointing out where government could do better. And I'll admit that a bit of a confession, really. I'm a bit of a late convert to impact assessments, because when we did the early work, I worked for the first Children's Commissioner, some of the early work that we did on impact assessments, I wasn't hugely convinced by in the early 2000s. I'm a lawyer by trade. I was really obsessed with incorporation of the convention and justiciability, being able to take government to court and challenge them and hold them to account. And impact assessments felt a little bit vague to me, but I've really come around to the power that they have. One of the things that we did for the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child is we asked children to use just 7 words to describe why rights were important to them. And it's a really good task, actually. Try that. Adults are really rubbish at it. Children are brilliant at it. So just 7 words. Why are rights important to you? And one of the ones that I think is really important for impact assessments was one that was rights are help before you even ask. This idea that there's a positive obligation on the state to take action. Children shouldn't have to be, this isn't an act of charity. States have got an obligation, and impact assessments very clearly set out by the Committee on the Rights of the Child as a measure of implementation alongside Children's Commissioners. And so Children's Commissioners have really championed impact assessments. And in Scotland, we managed to get some reference to it in law in 2014, and then more importantly, in a couple of weeks' time, our law, which incorporates the Convention on the Rights of the Child, takes the international commitments and brings them into our domestic law. That comes into effect in about 2 weeks' time, which is hugely exciting. And in that law, it says that the government has to have an impact assessment for every new legislative proposal. So every time the government's thinking about a new law, they have to do an impact assessment. And also when they're taking any decision that's of a strategic nature. So any big decision that government makes, they have to have an impact assessment. And if they don't do that, then we can hold them to account. So we can challenge that. So that's really, really useful. A little quirk is that in Scotland, the government calls them children's rights and well-being impact assessments. I don't love that. I don't understand why well-being is so inherent to children's rights. I don't understand why it was kind of brought out separately, but the government likes having that because it speaks to some of their policy commitments. And so if you ever look at Scottish stuff, it'll be, and I didn't even know how to pronounce the kind of acronym. CREA works really well. It's also the name of a baby alpaca, which is nice. But I'm not sure how to fit the W in, but if you're ever kind of looking at Scotland, there's a W in the middle of our CREAs for reasons that our government likes. But as others have said, there's been a growing number of the use of impact assessments, which has been really positive. Unfortunately, at the beginning of COVID, that wasn't the case. And as others have said, at the beginning of COVID, the Committee on the Rights of the Child said that we need to make sure that we see this not just as a health emergency, but also as a human rights emergency, and called on governments to take steps to focus on an holistic approach to children's rights in responding to the risks to life and health from COVID. Our government had a bit of a slow start, and so what we did as the Children's Commissioner's Office is that we did our own independent children's rights impact assessment, and we used the Committee on the Rights of the Child's framework to look at particular issues, and we looked at 9 particular issues of concern, including children in detention, education, mental health, etc., children, care experienced children, and we did a full impact assessment of the state's response to those issues. And that really triggered the government then to start doing their own. But we had to really challenge them. And Abigail, one of my former young advisors, said that it felt like you were playing a board game, and every time it came to your turn, someone played a skip card. Like, Uno's really popular and with my young advisors, but it's like, and they were saying every time it came to our turn and our voice, we got missed, and government said, no, we're too busy, it's too quick. And that's where impact assessments play a really important role. And the last point I'll make, I know we need to be aware of time. At the European level, one of the things that the European Network of Ombuds for Children, so this is children's commissioners there's 44 children's commissioners across Europe who are part of ENOC, the European Network of Ombuds for Children, and we're supported by a network of young advisors, so similar to the Children's Council that Eurochild has, we have young advisors as well, and we picked as a theme back in 2019-2020, children's rights impact assessment. Usually our theme was something more kind of thematic, like mental health, like a digital environment. But alongside the young people, we decided that impact assessment was something we would focus on. And I think quite a few people were a bit skeptical about this. How are children going to involve in the development of something so technical as an impact assessment? And bearing in mind my own skepticism earlier on, and it was amazing. The young people really, the children really understood it. They really engaged with it and helped us develop a common framework at the European level that really focused on how we could make children's rights impact assessments and children's rights impact evaluation, which is what you do after the decision, really meaningful. And I think that speaks to my concern when we were first working on this nearly 20 years ago. The first one we produced in Scotland, the guidance was 50 pages long. It was really complicated, really technical, and nobody used it. The common framework that we developed at the European level and what we'll be doing in Scotland speaks to, as other speakers have said, is really simple, principles-based, participation-based, evidence-based, and it connects to decision makers understanding that they can make more effective decisions by using this tool. It has to be practical. And involving children and young people in the process is a really good way of making sure that it's accessible and fit for purpose. And I think that's really, really key. And I'll stop there because I know Veronique is going to speak about some of the other work at the European level as well.
Thank you very much for that, Bruce. And that actually, as you say, leads us very nicely onto the work you've done, Veronique, with ENOC, the ombudspersons at the European level, and UNICEF. Would you want to talk us through that pilot project and some of the findings that could be interesting?
So yeah, Bruce already helped me a little bit here, so that's great. So yeah, I had the pleasure to lead that project. So we build on what had already been done by the European Network of Ombudspersons for Children. And actually, maybe just a note to say, I think what is really nice is to see the way everything fits in. Because when we started that bit for the European Network for Ombudspersons of Children and UNICEF, we got in touch with Scotland to learn from their experience. Ireland was one of the countries taking part in that project. And, you know, Eurochild is always a great support. So I think it really shows the importance of cooperation and exchanging good practices and making sure we talk to each other and we know what we're working on. So we build on the work that had been done by the network before that. And we work with 13 of the ombudspersons for children on piloting a child rights impact assessment, or well, we thought it was going to be a child rights impact assessment, but obviously it couldn't be a child rights impact assessment. It was 2021. Most countries had already taken the measures related to COVID with very little consideration for children, or when they did consider children, they looked at children as a monolithic group. And I think we've heard from the first panel the importance of disaggregated data and really thinking about different groups of children. So basically what the ombudsperson for children in those 13 countries in Europe and Central Asia looked at is an evaluation, which actually should be part as well. You should do a child rights impact assessment. Obviously, you should also do a child rights impact evaluation of the way the impact had really happened and not the potential impact. But we insisted as well on, and I think that was mentioned this morning as well, about it can be a positive impact as well. It doesn't have to be a negative impact. And I think we did find some positive impact looking at the COVID-related measures. And that's important to look at that aspect as well. I think if we look at, because we're very short on time, and I think if you want to look at the reports, you can find them online. But in terms of what I would say, like 2 or 3 recommendations, which have already been made this morning, but I think it's important to maybe emphasize them because this is also our learning, so it's very similar to what has been said. Actually, the gentleman from Northern Ireland who asked the question about the legal requirement, whether it was, that was one of our comments, obviously. It needs to be a legal requirement, both for the child rights impact assessment, but for the child rights impact evaluation, especially if it's done by an ombudsperson. A lot of the ombudsperson officers that we worked with struggled to get access to data. They were refused access to data. And then I think another very important point, it was mentioned, the general measures of implementation. It's a very complicated word, but basically it's about creating the right infrastructure. Kat talked a lot about child participation in terms of infrastructure, but data is part of it, and definitely capacity building. We notice, there's a big need for integrating child rights measures. So, if you want to think about general measures of implementation, you can think about, we're trying to be fit with a child rights impact assessment. So it's about, we're building the fitness studio. I don't know if you're going to fitness studios. I went last week and I realized I was really unfit. And I think it's all, what we're trying to do with the child rights impact assessment is us being fit, making our legislation fit for children. And I think the way we can do that is integrating a fitness routine and making sure our fitness studio is up to modern requirements.
Thank you for that. What I might do is I might just open it to the floor to see if there are any questions. A few have come in online, but I will give the option to anyone from the floor if they have any questions for our panel. Okay, I'll give you a minute to think, and I might give you a question.
Can I just add one thing, just in terms of one more recommendation is definitely keep it simple, but also make it modular. Like make it modular in the sense that having different possibilities for both for legislation, but also for decision making. Because what I see as well is that the local authorities, municipalities I've been talking to recently are interested in integrating it, and we need maybe something different for them, so something more simple, and also that we can integrate it in human rights impact assessment.
Thank you for that, Veronique. Bruce, did you want to come back in there? I will get to the questions from online and from the floor.
Slightly preempting questions. Just to build on that point, something I should have said earlier, there was a lot of debate in our Incorporation Act about whether we should apply this obligation to all public bodies or just to governments. And we ended up just applying it to government, but there was a lot of back and forth around that. And so there's a strong push to say that this is a really useful tool, and so every decision maker should be encouraged to use it, but we fell short of making it a requirement for all public bodies, and we just made it for government. But there's a real intention to say this is a tool that everyone should be using and seeing it as useful, but recognizing that the legal duty is primarily on government, so we didn't extend it down to that local authority level, but there's a strong encouragement to do so.
Great. So if there's no questions from the floor, oh, this gentleman here. Yes. If you just, one moment, there's one behind you there, and then we'll come to you next, sir.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hi, this is Altin from Albania. Thanks for your presentations. I just had 2 questions, out of curiosity, let's say. But is there any country that has any kind of legislation that prohibits child tokenism, or let's say use of a child, exploitation of a child, in the terms of that we consider during child participation? And second, how do you guarantee that children who are not nationals of the country, like unaccompanied children, migrant children, refugee children, etc., enjoy the same rights as, let's say, as other children in your own countries anyway? Thank you.
Could I ask you just to repeat the first part of your question there?
I'm very curious. As a lawyer, lawyers always look into legislation.
Yes.
So is there any piece of legislation anywhere across Europe, not the world, but across Europe, that strictly prohibits tokenism of children? That's the question.
I think I might go to Kath first on that. I can see that you're dying to answer.
Oh, if only. Because that's the problem with how participation is talked about. So often there will be processes where where governments have made a commitment to listen, and they will have put it in law. But whether that actually is still tokenism, tokenism is where children are listened to, but nobody does with anything with anything they say. So nothing prohibits it. But I do think that where governments make and countries make a commitment, put it in legislation that it should happen, that is an expression of will, and it is something that lawyers can use to try to put the pressure on to make sure that it's not tokenistic.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to come in, Bruce?
Yeah, just on the new law that's coming in Scotland, that requires all public bodies to act compatibly with the convention. Obviously, Article 12 of the convention says that children have the right to have their views heard in relation to decisions which affect them. So strictly speaking, we could challenge through the courts if a public body fails to do that. And in the law, it directs the court to look at things like statements of the UN committee, the general comments. And so there might be an argument that participation rights become justiciable, but I'm not sure. I think someone would have to do it pretty badly in order to meet that test. I'm not sure our courts would be easily convinced that, unless there was a real absence of participation, but it might be a good test case. So.
The lawyers in the room are planning the cases. Colm, I'll come to you next.
Just the second part of your question talked about seldom heard children and young people, and I suppose that's always a challenge, and I think it fundamentally goes back to routinely in your service, regardless of what your service is, recognising children and young people as active citizens and that they have a right to have their voice heard. And that is why making children's rights more explicit to all service providers, whether you are a hotel reception manager whose service has been taken over as a family hub, or whether you're a social worker, that it is routine practice that you recognise children and young people regardless of their background or their age. So I suppose that's really the fundamentals, the participation practice piece. And I suppose it's very heartening from the Building Children's Futures project, where we did roll out some training. We did have many representatives from a wide variety of services, including those providing accommodation in homeless settings, refugees, migrants, etc. So there, I think, is an interest. There also needs to be a resource that goes with that, though, I think, to help build the capability of frontline practitioners.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Colm. Something that I'm really struck by is that almost everyone wants to do it. They actually just are either afraid or don't know how. So there's a need for us to demystify, but also tools like what you've developed, Kath, are very important. So I think it's on all of us actually to make sure that they get out there so that it can be done by everyone. I might come to this gentleman here at the front if someone could pass him a microphone. He has a question, and then I'll take one or two online.
Yes, I've posed a question a few hours ago, and the first thing is that I want to say that the panel is talking too quick for us. We have not English as a mother tongue, so it demands a second thinking to follow you. That's the first. The second is we all want to eradicate poverty. Do you think this step of assessment is a step to eradicate poverty or not? In Flanders, we have a law that says that every minister has to implicate a test against poverty. But in reality, it's not used because the ministers have always an excuse not to applicate it.
Thank you for that, and apologies for the speed. It's something I get from English language speakers as well, so my apologies on that. I might open that question around poverty and the use of CREAs to the panel.
Well, I mean, from the 13 countries we looked at, they did, they had to identify groups of children to make sure, we wanted to make sure that they were really going to get information specific to certain groups of children. So they did look, some of them did look specifically at children living in poverty. And I think your question might also relate to human rights impact assessment in general, where I think, you know, we need to make sure the two are done as well, because we need to make sure the parents of those children have their rights respected. I would say, and maybe it's predictable that I would say this, but that you have to listen to children in order to know what you need to change in order to end poverty. You will make some decisions at a national level, but children know in their communities what is the barrier to them having full enjoyment of their rights. And I'm thinking of another project that I was involved with Eurochild called Reaching In, where children developed indicators for what it means to have the implementation of the child guarantee in their community. So if you bring that into the child rights impact assessment process, you've got ideas that children have defined that help you think about, is this measure going to lessen or worsen child poverty? So again, it's about everything that we're all doing, really linking up so that we hear from the work that children have already done and build that into our processes.
Yeah, poverty was the biggest issue for children in Scotland before the pandemic, and now it's a lot worse with everything happening. There's a clear rights framework around poverty, the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to benefit from social security, and that obligation on the state to use all available resources to the maximum extent possible. And so therefore, things like impact assessments and rights-based budgeting are things that states really have to be doing in order to demonstrate that they're using available resources to effectively deliver on those promises to children to an adequate standard of living, and benefit from social security, etc. In Scotland, we're not there yet, but that's one of the big pieces of work that we're really trying to do, is move towards participatory rights-based budgeting and the use of impact assessments on some of these really difficult systemic issues to make sure that when government's taking decisions, that they're doing so with the rights framework in mind, because the actions that government's taken previously have not been effective. And so I think taking a rights-based approach is the best way we can ensure the effective use of those available resources. So I think impact assessment and rights-based budgeting are the absolute key to addressing poverty.
Thanks for that, Bruce. And one thing I think to note about the tool and the resources that have been developed is that you can adapt them in any which way you would like. And I know from doing the training, Colma, some of the members were saying that they might just take one or two of the questions and use that in their work, or they might do the whole tool. So it is there for you and for your colleagues to take and adapt, and it will be shared after the conference as well. I might take one of the questions from online, because we've quite a few actually coming in, if that's okay. So I have one from Eurochild member from Fair Start Foundation. Could the panelists share how could universities, NGOs and authorities cooperate to secure the necessary resources? And what could be the role of NGOs? So there's no person from an NGO sitting here, so I think it's an interesting perspective. Who would like to go first? Veronique?
Well, I've worked for a long time for an NGO, and well, I think the role of NGOs can be, first of all, I mean, I think it was mentioned this morning, the role of NGOs in terms of supporting getting data, and I think we saw it in that project too. There were a few studies and reports already done by NGOs by the time the ombudsperson for children in those countries decided to do the child rights impact assessment. So obviously they use the data from NGOs alongside the data from government. So there is room for maybe in the future also seeing the way they can be independent, you know, the same way as Bruce mentioned, the child rights impact assessment they did was an independent one. It was not based on any legal requirement that they had to do it, but they did it nevertheless. And I think we can do the same as NGOs. We can do child rights impact evaluation. Probably it's more evaluation than assessment. Probably we can try assessment too, but it's more evaluation coming after a law has been taken and looking at the impact of that law.
So I think, again, looking at our service system as being a whole system where NGOs and statutory public sector are all working together. If you're putting children at the centre, that should be the reality. I think NGOs have a massive role to play in terms of all services for children and young people, and so therefore no different to state sector in terms of knowing what the rights are and quizzing your own decisions, but also strengthening your decisions. And I think that's a really important part. You know, if you want to build a case locally with your local council around why it's a good idea to put a playground into a certain part of it, use a CREA to build your case for why that is strengthening children's rights. But equally, I think in lots of countries, there's huge expertise in the NGO sector. So it's really important that we work in partnership with them in terms of building training and building opportunities for people to learn together. But I think the multi-agency setting for training, we definitely use that in our Building Children's Futures project, because there's huge benefit from people training together and learning from each other, not just the expert in the room. So from that perspective, in terms of expertise, I definitely think the NGO sector is a huge resource, but they're a massive resource anyway in terms of services directly to children and young people as well. So we're all part of the one, I suppose, dedicated system for raising the rights of children and young people and, I suppose, improving outcomes for them.
Thanks for that, Colma. Would anyone else like to come in on that question?
Just because there was a question about universities in that, you know, and speaking from a university perspective, I think we have a responsibility to all work together, whatever kind of institution that we're in, and that when we do that, we actually are quite effective in putting pressure on or working alongside people who do have the money, you know, because the other part of the question was about resources, you know. But it very much relies on that cooperation and willingness to put children at the centre, like you said.
I think that might be a lovely way to end the panel. I'm going to ask you all to remain seated for a moment, but I would just like to thank Kath, Bruce, Colma and Veronique for joining us in the panel. And I think what you really got a flavour of is how CREAs can be used at a European level, they can be used nationally at a high government level, but also the importance of using them at a local level, and even in your own services and in your own work, they can have a real effect. So what we want to do now is we want to hear from you. We are going to ask you to look at answering a question for us, reflecting on what you've heard today, just to think about, I suppose, what you think could be done to support the use of CREAs on the ground where you are, and what are the difficulties that we will need to overcome. We're going to put the question up on the screen. We're just going to ask you to talk to the people next to you. There's some paper at the end of your seats. For those online, I would like to thank you so much for joining us. You're more than welcome to stay on.